Today, I'm doing my first crossover episode of Getting Out of the Machine and Breakthrough Marketing Secrets with copywriter and entrepreneur Roy Furr. We talk about how we met way back in 2009 as two nobody wannabe copywriters and our career trajectories from there. How we both found copywriting and got our first clients, Roy's first copywriting success, how Roy chose his freedom date, that's the date he left the corporate world and launched his freelance business, why I had to borrow money for a tank of gas to get home after I had landed my first big client, the benefits and drawbacks of putting it all on the line to make your career work. Basically, this is all about how Roy is a way more responsible adult than I'll ever be, and why the feeling of relief is actually more important than the feeling of success. My name is Henry Bingaman. You're listening to Getting Out of the Machine.
Okay, here we are. It's a joint episode of Breakthrough Marketing Secrets and Getting Out of the Machine. I'm here with Henry Bingaman. Henry Bingaman is here with me, Roy. And Henry, let's start our conversation where we met. So in the hallway at the Delray Beach Marriott, standing in front of the registration table at AWAI, November 2009. So what do you remember about that moment, I suppose?
So I had never been to, I was about a year into my copywriting at that point, and I had never been to any kind of conference, anything like that before. So I remember walking in and seeing a bunch of people who were way older than I thought they were going to be. Remember at the time, it was most of who they were attracting were people in their 50s, 60s, sometimes 70s. So yeah, I walk into that building, and I had been staying in another hotel because I couldn't afford the Marriott. So I was staying in a motel way down the road. I had driven down from Pennsylvania, so I was exhausted. And I walk in and I'm just intimidated. I'm like, who are these older people? Oh, they must be super experienced. And then I'm going up to the registration line, and I see this other dude that's clearly in his 20s. And I'm like, oh, thank God, there's somebody of my generation here. And so I immediately I forget if you introduced yourself to me or I introduced myself to you, but like that first meeting, we were like, all right, we're going to be friends now. We're doing this conference together.
No, it was kind of crazy considering both of our career trajectories that we're just like, two late 20s. I don't know when you were born. I'm 82. So
I was 85. I was 24 85. At the time.
Okay. So both of us in our mid 20s, and for me, it was my first AWAI too. So I wasn't like super comfortable there. It was my first conference that I'd paid for. Like I'd been to other marketing conferences because I was already in marketing at the time, but it was a weird experience. I suppose it was good to have somebody who was in roughly the same boat as I was to dive into this big unknown with. So for both of us, there was kind of some pivotal moments there in terms of becoming a freelancer. For me, I specifically remember because I wrote the sales letter for the next year's boot camp. 3 months and 3 days afterwards, from getting home from that, I walked out of my full-time job for the last time. And so, if your podcast is called Getting Out of the Machine, to some degree, for me, like I still call that my personal Independence Day. How close in timeline were you? Because I know that we paralleled a lot, especially early on.
Yeah, I had been a full-time freelancer for about 6 months at the point when I went to that conference. And I had a couple clients. I think I was wrong because I did go to the Wealthy Web Writer conference in Austin.
Okay.
That was the one, that was the conference where I ended up leaving that and quitting my job shortly after. I had gotten AWAI as a client. They had agreed to hire me to write a couple little articles and try out a Facebook marketing campaign. But it was a distinctly different crowd at the Web Writer than the main conference that they have.
I would imagine like their main conference at that time, probably most of the clients had been acquired through Retire This Year. And just that word retire, there's not a lot of, 20-some-year-olds who are like retire. Okay. Or like retire just doesn't register. It's not in our reticular activating system to pay attention to that word, right?
Well, we're thinking about building our careers. You're in your mid 20s. You're not thinking about retirement at all.
So that's fascinating. So both of us, an interesting parallel that's not true of a lot of people who go through AWAI. There are two parallels that I want to pull out. One is that both of us had AWAI as a client, even by that time, right? Both of us,
Yeah.
our first boot camp, and both of us had AWAI as a client because we were pursuing the opportunities that they gave us on the side, right? But another parallel that I know that stuck out really early is a lot of people come to AWAI as like business opportunity buyers finding copywriting through AWAI. And both you and I were copywriters who found AWAI as a source inside copywriting.
Well, that's not exactly true. So,
oh, okay.
The way I started my
Maybe
career, yeah. So I graduated from University of Pittsburgh with a degree in fiction writing, which, there's not a lot of companies lining up to hire you with your newly minted degree in fiction writing. So yeah. I was just, I remember my senior year was like a week before I graduated, and I was just scrolling through monster.com looking for jobs. And I saw United Airlines was hiring for flight attendants.
I remember this. Yeah.
Yeah. So I was like, I'd never thought about being a flight attendant before, but they were going to fly me to Chicago for the interview. And I'd never been to Chicago. So I was like, yeah, all right, I'll take a free flight out for the interview. And I remember I got there and I was sitting in the lobby, and it was about 80% fairly young and attractive women that were applying for the job. And then the other 20% that were guys were more interested in flirting with me than they were with the ladies in the room. So I was thinking, all right, if I get this job, they put us in it's a training camp for 5 weeks outside of Chicago in an isolated facility. And I'm like, there's going to be all these young single ladies and a couple of gay dudes. So I'm going to be like the only romantic option for half of these women. And I was young, I was 22 years old, 21 years old, single. And I was like, this will be great. But so I ended up getting
one track mind. Yeah.
Yeah. And I actually did get a girlfriend in that training camp. So, but yeah, I got out of that training camp, started being a flight attendant for $20,000 a year, living just outside DC with 3 roommates. It was just not the ideal situation.
Yeah.
And so my dad had a supplement company when I was growing up, and he had bought the AWAI course to try to sell more supplements.
I remember this. Yes.
So he's looking at me. He had tried to give it to me a couple times during college, and I was like, I'm not into this commercialized stuff. Don't mess with my art of writing. And then you start making, $1,000, $2,000 a month or a little under that. And you're like, well, I can write. Maybe I should try this thing out. So he gave me the course, and so they actually did introduce me to the concept of copywriting through my dad, who had bought the product.
But I think even by that first boot camp, maybe I'm wrong, but I think even by that first boot camp, you were like deep into, you didn't stop at AWAI. Like I had gotten a couple other clients just here and there. And so from my dad's connections in the health space. So some other supplement manufacturers and chiropractor and natural health people, I'd gotten a couple little sales letters that I just tried to rip off John Carlton, and they bombed terribly. Yes. I have a specific rip off John Carlton, and it bombs history too. All right. So like my backstory, I kind of have that same. I think that a lot of people who become good copywriters, because you have to, on some level, be excited about the writing part, because that's so much of the time that we spend. To be successful at this, part of my background was thinking, I'm a writer too, like you, right? My minor was in writing. My minor was in English, like kind of generic English minor. My major was a Bachelor of Arts in Psychology, which is about as marketable as a fiction writing degree, right? You have to get a master's or PhD if you want much work in psychology. So I got the best job that I could get at the time when I graduated, which was answering the angry customer service phone calls at the local gas company. So
it'll take some psychology just to manage your own brain.
So if you didn't pay your bill all winter and you needed somebody to call and yell at because your service got shut off on the first warm day of spring, hi, this is Roy with Aquila. But the cool thing was, like, I ended up working noon to 9 p.m. No choice of shifts. That's just where they stuck me. Just like, no choice for you, I'm sure, of flight routes and whatever.
No, yeah.
But like after 7 p.m., nobody wants to talk to the gas company. And I found this book called The Well-Fed Writer, which, if you're a writer and you're like, okay, well-fed plus writer. Awesome. It's not the starving artist. And I like fell down the rabbit hole of, he was actually disparaging. Like I give that book a lot of credit for introducing me to copywriting, but he was like, I'm a freelance commercial writer and I write annual reports for publicly traded companies.
Do you remember who wrote it?
Yeah, Peter Bowerman.
Peter Bauer. I know that name.
Yeah.
That's probably because of the book.
Yeah. He did Well-Fed Writer Part 2, Well-Fed Self-Publisher. And for me, it was a good intro to the field, but he was disparaging these people who are like, they write sales letters and they get paid based on the royalty or based on the sales generated. And he's like, I could never do that. And I'm like, that's interesting. Like, oh yeah, okay. And I'd done commission sales stuff, but it'd been like selling newspaper subscriptions. So, and I wasn't very good at it. But something excited me about this, like entrepreneurial direct response. So I got the bug that way. But for me, I saw it as my ticket to freedom that I wanted as much as anything, because he was talking about being this freelance commercial writer and having control of his schedule and having control of his time. And at the time I was kind of I was in a giant call center with probably 60 plus reps in the call center, and it was unionized and there was no way to get paid more based on my performance. And I was similarly making about $20,000 a year and having people yell at me and no control over my schedule and any of that. And I had decided years before, just nod to getting out of the machine. I remember specifically going in, my mom was a computer programmer and did well as a computer programmer, but I remember going into her office on a weekend when she had a project that she was working on. And it's just this giant, it was like the epitome of the 90s workplace, right? It's this giant room with the fabric wall cubicles up 5.5 feet tall, and just the hum of computers, and it's floor after floor of this, right? And to me, that was the mission. I call it a cubicle farm. Not original terminology, right?
Corporate beehive is how I always picture it.
That's what it is. And you're just a worker bee. And I had no clue what I wanted to do, but I knew that I didn't want to do that. And so it wasn't until I found copywriting, which to me is still the most liberating single person career option that you can choose, right? Because it doesn't feel like one of those careers. But it wasn't until I found copywriting that I went from, I know what I don't want to do, to I know what I do want to do.
Did you have any, so a lot of my friends at the time, they got degrees in computer science and, business, and a couple of them went to law school, a couple of them went to medical school. And so they were looking at me, as what are you doing in this scammy industry? What is this? You're writing junk mail. And did you feel any of that social pressure of the awkwardness of being in an industry that nobody else understood? Because I think a lot of people, they'll start doing copywriting and they'll see the potential of it, but then their peer group will be like, yeah, you can't do that, because peer groups tend to try to bring you back to the median, right?
Yes, very much so. So I took a little bit of a different route, kind of almost influenced by Mark Ford, Michael Masterson, the chicken entrepreneur idea, right? So I knew that I wanted to do copywriting, but my timeline this was 2005. So 4 years before I met you, right? 2005, it was spring 2005 when I bought the Well-Fed Writer. And I think I ended up getting the Copywriter's Handbook at about the same time, and really early stuff on copywriting, right? I knew I was getting married July 9th, 2005. And I knew that my wife was going to grad school, basically 3 weeks. We were going on a week and a half honeymoon. And a week and a half after that, we were moving to Oregon, right? And she was going to be getting a stipend as part of her PhD program. But she wasn't going to be earning much money, right? She was getting her PhD, not getting rich. And so I knew we were moving across the country. We were going to have a half income. So I knew that I needed a full-time income. And
And a portable one at that.
Yeah, fairly portable. But I was like too afraid to start freelancing at the time. And so I started applying for marketing jobs. And I just knew, like, I wrote a cover letter that said, listen, I know my resume sucks for a marketing job. I know that nothing about this resume is good for a marketing job, but I know that this is what I want to do. I know that this is what I'm going to do. And if I make you successful, it's going to allow me to be successful in this. And so I'm going to do everything I can. I'm going to work harder than anybody with more qualifications to make you successful. And I got a few job interviews based on, by the way, cover letters. If you are applying for anything, cover letters are super underrated. Like most people who I've ever tried to hire, they don't even try with their cover letter. And they completely suck and you don't hire them. But cover letters can get you the job when your resume won't, at least get you the interview. So I got a bunch of interviews.
You think that was your first big piece of successful copywriting?
It was. And like the person who hired me told me that multiple times. Like he said, I would not have hired you if it weren't for your cover letter. He still like watches my episodes and reads my emails and stuff. Yeah. So I actually ended up with a full-time marketing job, and it was just like, I wanted to be a copywriter and they gave me opportunities to be a copywriter, but then I was working inside the marketing department and it was like a $2 million a year IT training publisher. And then in the next 3.5 years, we grew it to like, I think it was about 8 million when I left. And it was on a really good growth trajectory beforehand, but certainly a lot of this is stuff that happened. Like I measured it, but I got involved with like database marketing and copywriting and helping run a marketing team and hiring marketers. And I got involved with the sales team and like all that stuff. Because I was too afraid to like go out and become a freelancer, right? So I accepted less freedom so that I could get more freedom later. And then went to AWAI, and a couple months later, like they knew that I was on my way out again because I had a deadline. I had a deadline that my wife was finishing her PhD program and we were going to move across the country again, and I was going to lose that job. So it was like, I better figure this out. Yeah.
So what was the trigger point? The actual, like, I know I can drop the job and go freelance now. Like, what was the project you got, or the moment you realized I could do this?
Okay. So all along the way, like I had been clear, my destination is freelance copywriting. And I'd even gotten some clients on the side. Like I got David Bullock and I got Kim McCarthy and a lot of clients that wouldn't be recognized. But then I was working with AWAI while I was working that full-time job. But then when I went to AWAI and I came home, I was just like, I have to set a date, right? And it was when I got really intentional about actively prospecting, and suddenly my calendar started filling up. Like my plan was February 28th was going to be my last day at my job. And I think it was around Christmas time that I was just like, I'm going to start booking people for February 28th forward. And my offer is going to be the projects, like the old AWAI project where you do the spec challenge, was sales letter, order form, and like 3 emails and 3 space ads or something like that, right? And I said, that's going to be my template. And I'm just going to go to all these people and start trying to get projects from them. And then suddenly, when I said February 28th, I'm going to start doing this, and I had that very specific offer that I was making because I was reaching out to people who were already doing marketing that way. Like, and I talk about this with people all the time. Like, if you offer them what they're already hiring other people for as a freelancer, it's pretty likely that they're going to try you. Like if you can convey some level of confidence. So I put that out, and then it was just like, I had so much demand that I had to quit early. And so it was going to be like, I think February 15th or whatever the Monday was going to be a day off work anyway. And so like Thursday, I just decided I'm going to take a long weekend, and Thursday, Friday, Saturday, or Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, whatever. And then on Tuesday, I'm going to start my freelance stuff. So February 11th, it's like, bye. um, yeah. And if it weren't for like sushi and an entrepreneurial, like kind of Silicon Valley environment, like free sushi, poker nights, all of that stuff, that job would not have kept me as long as it did.
Yeah.
But that moment was like, as soon as I just took control over the client getting process. So I think going to AWAI and seeing people, probably at that point, I was looking up to you because you'd actually been doing full-time freelance, like as we talked back through it, whether or not, I should have or whatever, versus other people I could have looked up to see other people who were doing it, I think may have been the biggest pivot point.
Yeah, I think I had a little bit of different strategy for getting clients early on. I would get, so with like AWAI, I would propose things that they weren't doing but should be.
Yeah.
Like according to their own experts, like the Facebook ads, 2009, Facebook ads did not work. There just wasn't the system there in place. But, they had, I forget, who was it? Andrew Palmer, I think, had done a thing on Google ads. And I was like, oh, well, I could take what I learned here and try a Facebook ad campaign for you. And so they paid me for that. And then they had the Wealthy Web Writer launching around that time. And I was like, oh, you need some video content. Why don't I do these 2-minute guru videos, which I did the first batch of those for a year, and they were paying me, I think, $400 each for those. So with the chiropractic and natural health clients, I was like, oh, you're not doing any email list. Let me do a lead gen thing and then write some emails for you. So I was just showing them the value. I'd already gotten in through some way or another. And then I would show them value and try to pitch them on that.
Yeah. I find that that's hard. Like, it's clear you were having some success, and probably some of that comes from just conviction or courage or whatever.
I was making it look like I was having success, but those projects weren't coming in as regularly as they needed to. I was running up credit cards at the time. It was not really good.
Hey everybody, it's Henry here, and I want to give you a gift worth $599. That's not a joke. This is a promo breakdown I did with A-list copywriter Marcella Allison. Back in 2019, I copy-chiefed her through a very interesting promotion in the financial space. This promotion went on to sell, I think, somewhere in the neighborhood of $10 million. It's called the $5.5 million promo breakdown because that's where it was at when we recorded the lessons. But this was her most successful promo ever. Now, even if you're not a copywriter, this is a great training for a bunch of different reasons. Because here's the thing, Marcella records and saves everything. So you're going to get to hear the actual moments where we come up with a big idea, and how we work through the psychology of what it takes to get someone from a prospect to a customer. Now, this is a 10-video course. It has everything. It goes through the 5 biggest secrets of selling in one of these long video promos. So that includes the big idea. So how to find a compelling idea that weaves a golden thread through the whole promo. Misdirection, how to plant the seeds that keep people engaged through the whole promo without using any of those shady tactics. We talk about how to give your guru superpowers. Basically, this is all about making the voice of your promo a superhero in the audience's mind. We talk about entertainment. This is how to breathe life into your copy so it doesn't sound like just a dry recitation of facts and figures. And then there's my favorite, transmutation. That's how to take an ordinary product and turn it into an experience or a movement that people can get behind. Now, Marcella just sold her Titanides business, and this was literally for sale for $599 in that business. And when she sold the company, I said, hey, remember that training we did? Can I get the rights to that to give it out to my list? And her and the new owners agreed, so that's what you get here. Now, if you want to get this training, just go to henryb.co/Roy. You can get it right now at henryb.co/Roy. If you download it, I hope you enjoy it.
I didn't get my first really good project until the 2010 boot camp.
Okay.
I went back down. I was so deep in debt. Like, I remember I had to call my mom on the way back and borrow money to fill up my gas tank because I was like that out of money. But I had gotten a retainer for $5,700 a month at that boot camp to work with Natural Health Dossier and Mark Ford directly.
I remember. That period of time.
I put in so many hours, and like it was dumb the way I did it. I think yours is a much smarter way to do it. But I was a cocky young kid, and I was like, I'm going to make this work. And then I was too embarrassed to go back on myself.
Well, so I think the differentiation for me is I guess part of it, like, there is a part of me that can't not be responsible, and that can be a big disadvantage as an entrepreneur. I do find that people who are willing to like just put it all on the line, like there is something to be said for that, for entrepreneurship. But for me, like even by 2009, my son was born in May 2009. And so add to the challenges that I had to overcome in launching my freelance career, I had a son that was under one. My wife's income was not going to improve for at least another year because she had to go to internship. I had a mortgage that we were paying, so I was primarily responsible for that. And so we had set aside like 3 months income, but my goal, like 3 months worth of bills. So that if it was a little bit of a slow start, but I had this like, gun to the head, back against the wall, whatever, mentality of, if I don't make this work and do the work to make it work. And granted, I wasn't getting paid per project anywhere near what I've gotten paid recently. So it was a lot of work, but it was like, if I don't make it work, my whole family struggles because of it. So I didn't even have that option to not make it work,
there's something about not having options that makes you, figure it out.
No, I have had dumb periods. Like I think that anybody that's successful, I remember talking to Marcella about this, Marcella Allison. And like, I don't know, 2012, 13, something, there was a period where I was just like overcommitting to individual projects, but getting paid on a project basis.
Yeah.
And so I'd spend way too much time on a project that was not paying bills equivalent to the time I was spending on it. And so I went through a big slump around there where, things financially were not looking as good. So it's not like I've sailed through perfectly, and I've certainly made mistakes.
I tend to see any freelancer's income goes up, and then they'll have a year or two they're down, and then it goes way up. Like there's this wave effect in the upward direction, but there's always pullbacks.
Yeah. I remember, who was it? Somebody talked about the Kubler-Ross change curve at AWI one time. Are you familiar with that? Because it's exactly the curve that you're describing. It's like, and it applies like when you're making changes, like psychologically, emotionally, mentally, but it also applies. It's like your emotional response to a project. It is your
is that the
emotional response to your career.
Initial excitement, like valley of despair.
That's the one.
Okay.
That's the one. And some of that might actually, there may be some like emotional correlation to that income that you're describing. Because when you start off freelancing, you're like, I'm going for it. I'm going to do it. I'm going to, everything's going to be awesome. And you have that energy that you bring. And then things get hard because you realize that it's not just easy and automatic, like the promise in the sales letter that you read that got you into copywriting, right? And then you're emotionally down, and that translates to not as good of copy. And then you figure out like, this is going to take some work. This is going to, like, as much as it's about getting out of the machine and having freedom, like you're kind of building your own machine to support you. No matter what that ends up looking like, whether that's going completely off grid and figuring out how to provide crops for yourself and, grow food on your farm and whatever, there's a machine that you're building there to support yourself or your freelance career or whatever. And then eventually you figure that out and it becomes a time of plenty.
Yeah. When I say getting out of the machine, usually what I'm referring to is the system of education, corporations, government, the health system. It's all pushing you in one direction. So it is about building your own machine. It's about not being caught ground up in that machine and kind of, it's not like you don't have to fight the government to find freedom in your own life. You just have to build your own thing.
Yes, absolutely.
So could we talk about some of the pivotal moments in your career? Like, what was the first time you felt financially comfortable as a freelancer? Do you remember that?
I think it was let's see. So it would have been after I transitioned to working with the financial publishers. I did a spec assignment that got me in the door at Casey Research. And at the time they weren't owned by Agora yet. It was owned by Doug.
You were the copy chief over there for a bit, weren't you?
For a little bit. Yeah. Um, so, so like I got one project with them, and then they gave me a 3-project contract, and then they gave me a retainer, which I held on to for about 18 months that included writing and being, I always call it like an interim copy chief, because I was never like fully promoted into that role. And I didn't necessarily try to be promoted into that role, but it was kind of the role that I was filling, if that makes sense at all.
Yeah.
But I think it was my 3rd project for them. So it was the second one in the group of 3 before I got a retainer, was my first $1 million promo. And it was, maybe I'd actually written one for AWAI before that, but the $1 million took a while to play out, right?
And just to clarify, $1 million promo, usually when copywriters talk about it, is a promo that does $1 million in sales, not pays you personally $1 million.
Yes. And that's what I'm saying. Here. So it was for a back end service in the gold market, and this was early 2011, which for those who followed the precious metals market was like peak time to be selling. Just like late 2021 was peak time to be selling crypto. And I am pretty sure that it's going to go through a winter similar to what the precious metals has gone through for the last 10 years, that crypto is not going to be a beloved asset for a while. Other people will hate me. You may hate me for that statement.
Oh, I don't hate you. It'll do what it's going to do. But I did buy the largest chunk of my crypto right by the peak, like within like 4 days of the peak.
So that's most people's story.
Yeah, no.
When it comes to market peaks, so timing wise, like I was launching this backend service or relaunching. They were opening up access, and it was like limited, maximum 1,000 spots. It was at the time, this was before you could do a lot of like private placement marketing. Mm-hmm. So we had to be super careful. But the way that this guy ran was he would go visit these gold mines, and then he would make recommendations, and they were careful that pretty much every recommendation had to have a public stock recommendation. But it was, if you're an accredited investor, here's the number to call if you want to participate in the private placement on these terms. So it wasn't a accredited investor service. But it was like, so it was this very like high end, aimed at investors who were interested in investing a lot of money in unique opportunities. And he'd just done like 350% in, I want to say like 2 years or something. So like everything lined up for this promo to be awesome. And it was the biggest promo that they had done in short of their lifetime promotions, which are much higher ticket products, in a very long time. And
people forget at that point in time, it was very much a recession mindset around the country for investors. We had just been coming out of 2008, 2009. People did not
2011.
Yeah, people were not recognizing that this upward trajectory was anything more than a slight recovery. Like they didn't recognize what the next 10 years were going to look like.
No, not at all. So I did this, and Casey was a fairly small publisher at that point, and most of the revenue honestly came from Stansberry copywriters writing promos to the Stansberry list to sell Casey products. And that's why Stansberry ended up buying them. But I wrote this promotion for them, and then and it was only open for like 2-3 weeks, and I was getting paid monthly royalties. So, and the 2 to 3 weeks were split across 2 months, but I got paid 3.5%, which is 3.5% of $1 million. And it was pretty close to $1 million. 3.5% of $1 million is $35,000. Yeah. And so I got 2 checks back to back that added up to $35,000 on top of my normal monthly income, which was more than enough to pay the bills. And I was like, all right, cool. We're on to something here, right? Like,
do you remember the feeling of like just the tension melting out of your body when you get those checks? It's not even a celebratory feeling, or at least my first big royalty check, it wasn't celebratory. It was just relief. It's like, oh, all right, this worked.
Yeah. There's this interesting, like, this is maybe a little bit of a tangent. The whole law of attraction thing and like imagining the feeling of the wish fulfilled. I once heard somebody talk about like the important thing to do when you imagine the wish fulfilled is not just to imagine the positive feeling, but to imagine the relief of tension of the wish being not fulfilled. Like, oh, finally it paid off, right? Like, and yeah, I absolutely know what you're talking about. And whatever you think about law of attraction stuff, but I remember it is a very, very visceral feeling of like, you can finally take a deep breath. Yeah. And I remember like one of my favorites is getting a phone call from the business banker at the local bank. And they're like, we noticed you deposited this big check. Is there anything that we can do for you, Mr. Furr? Like, how do you make money again? Like, tell me about you write junk mail? Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I can't tell you how many times I've had to explain to bankers what I try to do. And they never get it.
Well, I stole from Richard Armstrong the whole, like, I write junk mail as a joke. If somebody's not in the industry, I just tell them I write junk mail. And then it's a joke. And then you can actually kind of talk about it because there's this point of reference. And I'm like, well, I don't write the junk mail that you receive probably, but that's the kind of stuff that we do. And it fends it off, right? Self-deprecating humor is great for fending off any kind of negativity around that.
Yeah, I have different answers about what I do depending on who's asking. Like if I want to seem important, I'm like, oh, I run an internet advertising agency. Yeah. Because, that's what my Ascension marketing services basically is, even though I just contract with basically 2 clients for the last couple of years. And
now you're like, I'm a accredited investor in private companies.
That's fun. Yeah, I say I'm in the weed business now because two of my biggest investments are in cannabis.
Yeah. You know how Snoop Dogg is in the weed business? I'm in the weed business too. So basically I'm Snoop Dogg or Martha Stewart.
Yeah. So it's funny. So I just because I'm invested alongside Raekwon for Wu-Tang. So we were out touring one of these grow facilities in Oklahoma City. It was like a year and a half ago or so. And we're hanging out in Airbnb with me, Jed Canty, and Raekwon and our lawyer, Josh. And I for some reason, Little Dicky came up. Do you know who Little Dicky is? He's like a goofy rapper.
Yeah, I do.
He did a song with Snoop Dogg. And
I remember, that's how I know of him.
Raekwon had never heard of Little Dicky. And I was like, oh, you got to see this. And I put on the video with Snoop Dogg. And he's like, hold on, I got to text Snoop. It's just the craziest thing where you're like, oh, yeah, you know that dude.
Yeah. That's awesome. That's awesome.
It's a weird life.
It is. Yeah.
But back to marketing. One of the things that I wanted to talk to you about is because, so you did the sales letter for the Titans of Direct Response with Brian Kurtz back.
Yeah.
How many years ago is that now?
I just was emailing Brian. It's about 8 years ago, but I emailed him and I said, by the way, like 10-year anniversary is coming up. Are you planning on doing anything for Titans, like Titans X or something? Right. And he might. Actually, is what he said to me is you got the gears turning. So it was 8 years ago. So at this point, it feels like rehashing old news. But yeah, I learned from Dan Kennedy that you make every molehill you have into a mountain.
But that's actually what I wanted. Molehill. Yeah, that's the one I wanted to talk because you sold out that event, and it's a big feather in your cap to get, and you got direct feedback from Gary Bensavinga. I think you got a Gary Bensavinga testimonial. But yes. You have since then leveraged that into so many different opportunities. So can you kind of talk about how you ended up getting that project in the first place and then what the ways you kind of worked with it even after it was successful?
Yeah. So you're familiar with the Dream 100 strategy from Chet Holmes, right? Like,
I am not.
Oh man. One of the best books on selling is The Ultimate Sales Machine. And it's written by Chet Holmes, who's passed away, but he worked with Jay Abraham on developing programs around that and stuff. And in that book, he talks about the Dream 100 strategy, and all sorts of people, including me and Russell Brunson, have repeated this a whole bunch, giving credit to Chet Holmes. It's also like David Ogilvy talks about this with a different name in Confessions of an Advertising Man. Basically, the Dream 100 strategy is you come up with a list of your top ideal clients that you want to work with. So I remember, I'm sure I still have the spreadsheet somewhere. I wrote non-Agora financial publishers was like .xls, right? It was an Excel spreadsheet. And the reason that it was non-Agora is because when we were coming up in financial, for the most part, Agora required you to go work in-house in Baltimore or Delray Beach. And I did not want to go. I didn't want to move to Baltimore or Delray Beach. It was just not in my life plan. And so it was non-Agora financial publishers. And I came up with this list. And then once I had the big list, I narrowed it down based on who I could find using long form sales copy, right? Going back to me saying, I'm looking for marketers who are doing a long copy sales letter, order form, et cetera, right? And I came up with a shorter list, and Boardroom / Bottom Line was on that list as one of the big, they're less like investment publishers, but they were still kind of,
there's some financial advice in there. Yeah.
Yeah. And I knew that they hired a lot of the best copywriters, so kept them on the list. And I knew Brian was at Boardroom, right? And so I had connected with him off and on a bunch of times. Like he was going to AWAI and speaking at AWAI. I interviewed him for my, like Jed used to call it, Live with Roy podcast versus Live with Roy. I gave him just like positive vibes whenever I could, like message him things. At one point, I got a piece of Boardroom direct mail, and I sent him a note and I said, hey, Brian, like this looks like really good direct mail. I noticed that you're not using the back of the envelope, and the front of the envelope is covered with great bullets. I noticed you're not using the back of the envelope. And so I wrote a list of bullets and I said, if you want to test these, if you want to use them, whatever, just do it. And he forwarded it on to, I think, Michelle Wolk or somebody on the creative team at the time. And so I was just doing everything I could to provide him value. And then he hosted an event with Perry Marshall, who was another one of my marketing heroes, who at this point, like, it's funny, kind of a small world thing. Perry has come to my improv show in Lincoln, Nebraska, because his brother is in my improv group, because his family is from Lincoln, Nebraska.
Really? That's awesome.
So I have a
Perry's in Chicago, right? So that's a hike for him.
Yeah. I mean, he was going to be in Lincoln anyway, so he didn't come for me, certainly, but he came for the family. But we've also like gone to coffee in Lincoln when he's in town and stuff. But I hadn't met Perry yet. So Brian was hosting Perry the year before Titans at Boardroom. And so I paid to go as an attendee. And I wrote this huge testimonial for Perry, which then Brian used to promote the event. I remember calling him like one of the top 5 copywriters who's not actually selling copywriting services right now or something, because I really like his copywriting. And then Perry used it to promote the event and like all this stuff, right? And so it was all about getting in the good graces of these people, developing this relationship because they were on my Dream 100 list. And Brian had sent out an email to his list about, I'm thinking of doing something big next year as the follow-on for Perry. And we talked, and then like I randomly emailed him the day after Marty Edelston passed away. And we ended up, I remember which coffee shop I was sitting in the parking lot and talked to him for like an hour. I was like, if you don't want to talk today, like, I understand, dude. Like, but he's like, no, I want to talk, and Marty would want me to talk. And so we talked about what Titans would become before it was really a plan, right? And then it was just a matter of like, Brian wrote the sales letter, David Deutsch, he sent it to David Deutsch. It was like 8 pages. And David's like, Brian talked about this on stage. David said something like, hey, so if I wanted an expert on databases and lists, I would come to you. Why don't you, find someone to write this and enjoy the rest of Sunday with your family? And I got an email from Brian because of years of like developing that relationship, right? And had the opportunity. And I think part of what made the sales letter so good is like, so Jed, incredible copywriter, hates marketing gurus. Like at least he did. I'm
it's still
pretty sure that hasn't. Yeah. Okay. I loved marketing gurus, right? Like I studied all of them. Like I'm here riffing on who wrote what in what book, right? And so I'd studied all these people. I knew who all these people were. And so I was able to like infuse my own excitement for all these people being in the room together with Brian's stories, and like having studied Boardroom because I wanted him as a client, but I also knew they hired all the best copywriters and stuff. And so it translated into Paris Lampropolis ended up saying like, he was like, Brian, I didn't realize you'd learn to be a copywriter and write so well. Like, because I captured my own excitement that paralleled Brian's excitement. Yeah. So I think that kind of answered your question about how it all came together, and hopefully provided some suggestions for.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. And that event sold out pretty quickly. So you got a lot of, and Brian kept giving you credit, which was great, but you've kind of leveraged that in, I've seen you use it in so much of your marketing material for other things.
Yeah. Well, when you have that feather in your cap, you have to wave it around from time to time. Right. If that was the year that I ended up doing my first copywriter coaching, and like Chris Wright, hell, when you're at Money Map, I don't know how many, like percentage wise of the people who I ended up doing some level of coaching or junior copywriting with, it's like 80% of them went on to get jobs at Money Map with you guys. I don't know that, like, I should have been the Money Map training school. I should have formalized that.
It's because you know me so well and Jed. You're
yeah.
This style will work for them.
But like in 2014, Chris Wright, like he ended up being one of my first coaching clients. And in part, I'm sure it was because of Titans. I ended up just finding it easier to promote myself because, hey, I was the Titans copywriter. And so now I can align myself with Dan Kennedy and Gary Benspinga, Jay Abraham, like all those people. I've been to private events that Jay Abraham was involved with that I still remember almost getting kicked out of a room. Like, he's not supposed to be here, but because I was the Titans copywriter, Jay's daughter, Michelle, just went to bat for me. And it's like, no, he's going to be in this room. It was whatever, like I was qualified to be in that room. But it was kind of a funny scenario that, it's a ticket. It's a ticket in the door. Whether that's a ticket in the door to somebody's consciousness because it's a really solid proof point is like, I know copywriting, or it's a ticket in the door through some other whatever, right? Getting in that room with Jay Abraham.
So one of the things I like to ask a lot of copywriters about, you've heard Scott Adams' concept of the skill stack?
I'm not sure. Explain it.
So Scott Adams wrote the Dilbert comic, and he said, I'm a pretty good illustrator, but I'm not the best. I'm kind of funny, but I'm not hilarious. And, I'm pretty good at business, but not the best. But when you put all of these three skills together, I have a wildly successful, comic strip. So I always look at copywriters because it's not just the writing. When you have to have a successful career, there's so many other things that come with it. So if you had to kind of name your skill stack, your top 2 or 3 skills, can you think of anything of? So obviously writing is going to be one of them, but anything else that is it networking? Because that seems like a lot of what you're describing is getting in the room with the right people at the right time.
Maybe that's part of it. I still remember at Titans, went to this VIP dinner. I'm not sure if you were there. Maybe.
No, I wasn't. I was with the Money Map crew at that point.
Yeah. So he hosted this VIP dinner. And one of the things that they did, it was modeled on these boardroom dinners, which were these really cool things, is went around the table and Brian actually introduced every single person. And it was much bigger than their normal dinner. So he was there. It was like 60 people, him going around the room, introducing everybody. And you answered questions beforehand. And he talked about, he asked you to share your superpower, and this fits in my skill stack. That there's the copywriting, right? But I said that I help create marketing campaigns that are greater than the sum of their parts, where I'm always thinking not just like what is the sales letter going to say, but a word I use a lot now, or term I use a lot now is conversion architecture. So understanding funnels and having multiple upsells and having follow-up sequences, or when webinar campaigns were fairly new, I created something for Casey Research that ended up being the model that they were using even after they sold to Stansberry. That admittedly wasn't original, but I brought it to Casey Research, where it was like the event premiere. And so they did a big studio recording, and we did it like a launch, where it was this event, and there was a whole sequence designed to get people to sign up for it, and a whole sequence designed to get people to attend live, and then a whole sequence designed to get people to do the replay and all of that. So it's all of this like conversion architecture stuff that for me is beyond copywriting. Like it's in the skill stack. Those are the two main ones for marketing results. But then I do think that you're right, that I have this natural pull towards building relationships. And admittedly, in the last few years, probably a combination of COVID and other things, like I haven't been in person nearly as much as I probably should have been. And I'm feeling a pull back towards doing more in-person stuff. Being in Nebraska, it's hard. Like it's hard to do a lot of in-person stuff versus being in, let's say, the East Coast area, couple 100 miles of New York City, and you have a lot of in-person opportunities. So networking and definitely long-term building relationships has been important to me. I'm trying to think of like other major things in this skill set. I do have kind of the simplification mindset that I like to take concepts and simplify them. And I think that that's been really helpful in, for example, working with junior copywriters and developing junior copywriters. When I've done that, I'm actually moving back into like being brought in as an outside copy chief into an agency right now. So there is some level that's something that that I've recognized is a real strength of mine, is not just writing copy, but like all that thinking behind copy and research and all of that. And the copy chief role, when done in an active way, can really support that. So like, you know, when, for example, working with a junior writer, which is something I learned through working with you guys at Money Map, it's like, you know, Jed could spend an hour or two on the phone with us and like define an entire promo and then step away. And I've realized that is my most valuable time on any project versus the long, hard slog of writing every line of the promo.
Jed's interesting to watch work, because you'll sit back, you'll bring him your first draft of your promo, and you'll have talked about the idea and stuff a little bit. You know, Jed Canty is, he wrote the Aftershock promo, which was one of the first $100 million promos in our space. He sold well over $1 billion worth of stuff. He's the top copywriter at Money Map Press. He built Newsmax Money News up from 10 million to 100 million. So he's just one of the all-time greats in copy working today. Yeah. And he has this really annoying way of reading your copy and then just dictating something to you that's 10 times better than what you wrote. And you have to type fast or record him, or you're never going to get it all. But he speaks in copy when he wants to. It's a superpower. It's amazing to watch. Yeah, it's interesting, guys. You're a little more of an extrovert than I am, I think. Like, I'm fairly introverted. My strategy has been to attach myself to someone successful and kind of not ride their coattails, but absorb everything I can with them. Like, that's what I did with Mark Ford. When I got in there, you know, I wouldn't leave him alone. I was getting, you know, copy reviews every time I could. He ended up introducing me to Jed Canty. Jed, you know, I've been with him since 2011, originally at Newsmax, where I wrote a promo with Steve Bannon at the time, Generation Zero. So that was an interesting experience before he became the infamous Steve Bannon.
Yes.
But I really didn't start having good success until I got to Money Map. And it just took a couple of years to really learn financial copy. But yeah. And then, you know, Marcella Allison, who you mentioned earlier, has been a great contact for me because she's such an extrovert and she knows everybody and she loves to help other people. So she's made a lot of really lucrative, honestly, introductions to me.
Marcella is a massive, massive connector. I don't want to tell people to go try and get into her good graces, but if you do end up in her good graces, because I don't want to overwhelm her with that, but if you do end up in her good graces, you just end up, whether you want it or not, getting 1,000 great introductions.
Yeah. Marcella is dropping off the grid for the next 2 months, so don't try for a little while to contact her.
Yeah, it's weird that you describe me as an extrovert, because I definitely don't consider myself an extrovert, but I found that I've developed the skills enough that I kind of ride the line where I don't, and I've even taken like the Myers-Briggs test that tell you extrovert, introvert, and they find that I ride the line. I'm like in the middle, right? So I can do extrovert, I can do introvert. I am most comfortable, like, if you go back to the definition of, do you get recharged by being alone or being with people?
Right.
I get recharged by being alone, which by that definition, I'm an introvert.
But there's another spectrum to that, where it's how exhausting do you find it to be around other people?
That's true. And I probably don't find it as exhausting as many people who consider themselves to be introverts.
Yeah, I go to a conference. You're not going to hear from me for 3 days afterwards.
Yeah.
It's me and my dog. We're not talking to people.
Yeah, but even then, like in a situation like this, I love the one-on-ones, because, you know, even if I feel like an introvert, a situation like this, it's really easy to end up just coming out. And actually, one-on-one conversations get me more energized than being alone. Yeah. So where do we want to go? Where do we want to wrap up?
So you've done something that I'm kind of in the process of doing, right? About 2 months ago, I basically dropped all my copywriting clients. Now I'm still talking to them, and, you know, I have a relationship, but I'm, I started this podcast. I'm going to start a membership site soon. So, and you've kind of gone that route already. So I kind of just want to, while I have you on a podcast, tap your knowledge. So what inspired you to start the Breakthrough Marketing Secrets, and kind of what has that process been like? What has that experience been like, going from pure copywriter to kind of coach and business owner?
Yeah. I feel like part of it has been like a labor of love, a labor of passion. Like, I feel like I've always there's something to that line from Hamilton, why do you write like you're running out of time, where I've always been pulled to write. And so, like, when I wrote articles for AWI, it was just so easy for me to write in my own voice. When I have written articles for other people, it's easier for me to write in my own voice and to share my own perspective than it is for me to write client stuff, even though I've gotten pretty good at writing client stuff. And it started without a revenue model, and it started without a real goal. It just started as, I'm going to start writing an email every day. And I remember I actually just asked some copywriter who I don't remember her name at this point, but it was like, I'm going to start writing a daily email, and we're talking. So can you join my email list and start reading them? And she said, yeah. And so I just started publishing this daily email, and then started kind of creating opportunities out of that. A lot of it was like, hey, I've done copy reviews for clients, so I'll offer a copy review service. Hey, I might do coaching. So I'll do this coaching service. Then I started doing training, and then I went from training to wanting to create this resource that I sometimes call like Netflix for copywriting and marketing training. So it's just, you sign up for, one monthly fee and you get access to the entire catalog. That comes, a lot of the decisions that I've made have come with their own challenges. Like, I feel like I'm never good enough in terms of volume of content creation. I feel like I over obligate myself to some of those things. I've never talked about that on a podcast before. And sometimes that can be a little bit difficult, especially because one of the things that I've prioritized in going into copywriting is freedom of time and freedom of place, but freedom of time, and specifically the time to be able to pick my kids up from school a lot of days of the week. And in the summertime, I'm down to like half time in terms of my weekly schedule. And so the rhythm that I get in during the school year cannot be maintained through the summer, which can be a challenge at the beginning of most summers. So the process was kind of an organic one, but one of the things that worked really well for me was, I think that a lot of people end up getting burnt out on financial copy after a period of time.
Everybody.
And there's ways to deal with it and ways to respond to that. But what I noticed was, like every new project, I was kind of dreading it more than anything. So when it came time to just step back and say, can I have something else that sustains me for a while? Breakthrough Marketing Secrets, BTMS Insiders, the membership site, all of that became the sustenance, right? Like one of the things that I learned in that dip, the valley of despair during my early freelancing, my accountant sat down with me and he said, Roy, you need two approaches to income. So what was going on was I was like, everything was an attempt to get rich, right? Like every project was an attempt to get rich. And that's why I became hyper-focused on individual projects. And he said, that's great, that's fine, but you need to pay your bills income. And so on a monthly basis, you need to be bringing in income that is specifically, that's going to cover all your bills. And then you can pursue the get rich stuff and spend as much time as you need on that, right? And so what it allowed me to do was kind of create this income stream that, more than covered my bills and any kind of short-term financial thing that I would be concerned about. And then pursue the things that I was more excited about for the long term that didn't have to pay off immediately. So it has always been more about freedom than anything else, I would say. But in some ways, I've fallen into the entrepreneurial curse where in the pursuit of freedom, we launch a business that ends up sometimes feeling like less freedom.
Yeah, I can understand that. Do you ever consider scaling back the content if that's you're putting out a video 5 days a week, basically, and a short article that goes along with it, and then all the training content that you're building? So have you considered like bringing that back, or do you think it would affect the business too much?
I do consider it. It might improve the business. It might reduce the business. I tend to try to make sure that I fulfill any past obligations, but it's weird to set up this like perpetual ongoing obligation because when are you going to stop fulfilling that, right? Yes, I've considered it, and I have continuously decided not to yet. I certainly could scale back. I could make decisions that would be consistent with that. It is there is a little bit of a balancing act between deciding to scale back and making sure that I'm fulfilling any promises that I've made. So I'll just say yes, I've considered it. But here I am 5 days a week.
Yeah, one of the reasons I started with a 1 day a week podcast, as like when I originally planned this out, I was going to do 3 day a week. That consistently showing up in front of people. But I wanted to make sure that I wasn't going to overwhelm myself. First of all, I was burnt out on financial copywriting, putting out, a bunch of promos a year and trying to keep up with all the launches and stuff. And I had 2 copywriters under me. So it was just a lot of work. I wanted to scale it back, but I'm considering ramping up to 2. I don't want to get myself in that trap of like, how am I going to get this content out this week?
Yeah. It can be difficult. And I actually work with a publishing assistant who does a lot of the publishing stuff behind the scenes with me. And that was good because it allowed me to maintain the current volume of content after like a learning period, because anytime you're working with somebody new, there's a learning period. But it allowed me to maintain the volume of content while reducing the workload. Ultimately it's about like my highest value activities are the content creation and marketing creation in my business. And so it's about focusing as much as possible on on that stuff. Yeah. And if I'm getting burnt out at this point, I am better able to recognize it. And there's also been a lot of like personal growth in terms of understanding like what work actually looks like, that we haven't gotten into and probably don't have time for here. But yeah, like it is something that whenever you're launching a business, you kind of have to commit. I don't necessarily think that you have to commit to like 70 hours a week, driving yourself completely bonkers. Some people do believe that. And maybe in some industries that's more needed than in others. But in the pursuit of, getting out of the machine, I want to build a business that I can build within the time constraints that I give to it. And right now that's what this has been. And yeah.
Yeah, most of the businesses I'm consulting with right now, just on a part-time basis, are like tech startups or one pharmaceutical startup, one marketing startup. And those dudes, you do have to work 70 hours a week when you're launching a business that has employees and you're trying to do, capital raises and all that. But I'm sitting back going, I don't want to build a machine that's worse than one I was trying to escape from.
Yes, absolutely. I think that's probably a pretty good phrase to wrap it up on.
Yeah, man.
If that works for you.
So for my audience, can you tell people where they can find you?
Okay, so probably the primary link, actually, let me do this since we have a little bit of time between recording and publishing to get it out. I'm going to set up a link at breakthroughmarketingsecrets.com/Henry for Henry Bingaman, right? breakthroughmarketingsecrets.com/Henry for people who have listened to this episode. That will link you through to just the most relevant ways to connect with me relative to what we've talked about here. And yeah, you'll be able to sign up, at least follow my daily episodes, get email updates, etc. And for my audience, what's the best way to follow you?
Yeah, I'm actually going to rip you off there. So I'm going to set up a link at henryb.co/Roy. I think I'm going to have a special bonus there. There's a marketing or a sales letter breakdown that I think people might find interesting.
Yeah.
So we'll give that away for free.
Henry has made a small fortune in sales with his copy. I don't know the exact number, but
I've done well over 300 million. I got my income up to 1.4 million a year at the peak.
And one of my favorite ways as a copywriter to learn is to actually have copywriters say, I wrote this for this reason, right? And that's like one way that I've taught copywriting is I wrote this for this reason. Like, let's go through line by line. And so a sales letter breakdown from Henry. It's good stuff.
All right, man. It was great talking.
Yes, you too. I'm glad we could catch up, and I look forward to being able to speak with you again soon.
Absolutely. All right, man.
Hey, everybody, it's Henry here, and I want to give you a gift worth $599. That's not a joke. This is a promo breakdown I did with A-list copywriter Marcella Allison. Back in 2019, I copy chiefed her through a very interesting promotion in the financial space. This promotion went on to sell, I think, somewhere in the neighborhood of $10 million. It's called the $5.5 million promo breakdown because that's where it was at when we recorded the lessons. But this was her most successful promo ever. Now, even if you're not a copywriter, this is a great training for a bunch of different reasons. Because here's the thing, Marcella records and saves everything. So you're going to get to hear the actual moments where we come up with a big idea and how we work through the psychology of what it takes to get someone from a prospect to a customer. Now, this is a 10-video course. It has everything. It goes through the 5 biggest secrets of selling in one of these long video promos. So that includes the big idea. So how to find a compelling idea that weaves a golden thread through the whole promo. Misdirection, how to plant the seeds that keep people engaged through the whole promo without using any of those shady tactics. We talk about how to give your guru superpowers. Basically, this is all about making the voice of your promo a superhero in the audience's mind. We talk about entertainment. This is how to breathe life into your copy so it doesn't sound like just a dry recitation of facts and figures. And then there's my favorite, transmutation. That's how to take an ordinary product and turn it into an experience or a movement that people can get behind. Now, Marcella just sold her Titanides business, and this was literally for sale for $599 in that business. And when she sold the company, I said, hey, remember that training we did? Can I get the rights to that to give it out to my list? And Her and the new owners agreed, so that's what you get here. Now, if you want to get this training, just go to henryb.co/Roy.